The peaceful Velthari Republic was dying. For 300 years, they had lived in harmony across their 17 beautiful worlds. Their cities gleamed like jewels among the stars, filled with gardens and libraries where their people studied art and philosophy. They had no armies, no weapons of war. They believed violence was a relic of their primitive past. Then the Murgoth Empire found them. The attack came without warning. Massive black ships dropped from hyperspace like hungry beasts. The Murgath were everything the Velthari were not: brutal, savage creatures who lived only to conquer and destroy. They had razor-sharp claws, thick armored skin, and eyes that gleamed with cruelty. World after world fell in mere weeks. The Velthari tried to negotiate, offering their knowledge, their art, anything the invaders might want. The Murgoth response was always the same: total destruction. They burned libraries, enslaved the survivors, and turned peaceful garden worlds into smoking welliths. Prime Minister Kelres watched his civilization crumble from the capital city of the Serra Prime. Reports flooded in from across their territory. New Geneva gone, Paradise Station destroyed, the crystal cities of Amethyst, the Seventh, nothing but rubble. Billions of his people were dead, or worse. The council chambers where he stood had once been a marvel of architecture. Crystal walls that caught and scattered light in rainbow patterns. Floating platforms where delegates from 17 worlds had debated poetry and science.
Oh.
The walls were cracked. The platforms had crashed to the floor, and emergency lighting cast everything in harsh red shadows. His hands shook as he approached the ancient device in the center of the ruined chamber. The emergency beacon was older than their current civilization. Built during the Dark Wars thousands of years ago, when their ancestors had fought for survival. It was a crude thing compared to their modern technology, all hard metal and blinking. Lights instead of elegant crystal interfaces. The device had been sealed for 3,000 years, with a simple message carved into its surface in the old language: use only when all hope is lost. That time had come. Kelris placed his palm on the activation panel. The metal was cold against his skin. Round him, the last few survivors of his government watched in silence. They all knew what this meant. They were admitting defeat, confessing to the galaxy that the mighty Velthari Republic could not save itself. May the ancestors forgive us for what we are about to unleash, he whispered, then pressed his hand down firmly. The beacon came alive with a deep, thrumming sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Lights raced across its surface as ancient computers woke from their long sleep. The emergency signal began broadcasting across hyperspace, reaching out to every corner of the galaxy with a simple message repeated in hundreds of languages. Help us, you're dying. Send warriors, light years away at Earth's newest deep space. Monitoring station orbiting Pluto, the night shift was settling in for another quiet watch. Captain Tom Rodriguez was reviewing routine reports when his communications officer suddenly straightened in her chair. Lieutenant. Amy Foster had been monitoring background radio signals from across the galaxy, mostly looking for natural phenomena, or trading communications between known alien species. What she picked up now was different, urgent, desperate, and definitely artificial. Captain, you need to hear this, she said, her voice tight with excitement and concern. The signal was unlike anything in their databases. It came in mathematical bursts that clearly indicated intelligence, but wrapped in languages that their computers couldn't even begin to translate. Still, some things needed no translation. The tone was unmistakably desperate. The repetition suggested extreme urgency. And buried in the mathematical portions were star charts showing multiple systems under attack. It's a distress call, Foster confirmed after running it through their best analysis programs. It's a big one. Whoever sent this is facing extinction.
Rodriguez
stared at the display showing the signal's origin point. It came from a region of space they had mapped but never visited. Too far away for their current technology to make the journey practical. Until now, he opened a priority channel to Earth's Fleet Command. Admiral Mike Harrison answered within minutes, his weathered face appearing on the screen from his office on Luna Base. "What do you have for me, Rodriguez?" Harrison asked. "First, contact situation, sir. We've received what appears to be a galaxy-wide distress signal. Multiple star systems under attack, massive casualties. They're specifically asking for military assistance." Harrison leaned forward. "How can you be sure? Can't even translate their language yet. The math doesn't lie, sir. Population figures. Dropping by billions. Fleet movements consistent with invasion patterns. And they're broadcasting on every frequency simultaneously. That's not exploration or trade communication. That's desperation." The Admiral was quiet for a long moment, considering. Earth had only achieved faster-than-light travel 5 years ago. They had made contact with a few nearby species, but nothing like this. This would be their first real test on the galactic stage. "Prep the Third Fleet," Harrison finally said. "We're going to war." Neither the humans nor the Velthari knew it yet, but this decision would change everything. The aliens had called for help from across the stars, hoping to find salvation. They got instead were the children of Earth creatures from a world so violent and dangerous that the galactic community had classified it as uninhabitable by intelligent life. They were about to learn why that classification existed. The human fleet burst from hyperspace like thunder, breaking the silence. 57 warships materialized in perfect formation around Velthari Prime, their dark hulls bristling with weapons that the peaceful aliens didn't even have names for. The ships moved with a predatory grace that sent chills through every observer. On the bridge of the Velthari command vessel, alarms screamed as sensors detected the newcomers. Science Minister Thalara stumbled backward from her console, her 4 purple eyes wide with absolute terror. Her delicate flower-like features went pale as she read the impossible data. No, she whispered, her voice shaking. The origin. C-Na-2-R-E. It's from Salttree. That's a Class 12 death world. The other Velthari officials looked confused. Their peaceful society, most had never even heard the term. But Thalara had studied xenobiology, and she knew the classification system used by advanced galactic civilizations. Class 12 means maximum lethality, she explained, her hands trembling as she pulled up the galactic database. Extreme gravity, deadly radiation, poisonous atmosphere, violent weather, and predators so savage that most species consider the entire planet uninhabitable. No intelligent life should be able to evolve there, let alone build starships. Prime Minister Kelris felt his heart sink. "You mean we called for help from monsters?" Before anyone could answer, a communication signal came through. The voice that emerged from the speakers was unlike anything they had ever heard. Deep, confident, with an undertone that suggested barely controlled violence. "This is Admiral Mike Harrison of the Earth Defense Fleet. We received your distress call and have come to assist. Request permission to dock and coordinate our response." The Velthari leadership exchanged terrified glances. They had asked the galaxy for warriors. The galaxy had sent them creatures from a world that shouldn't exist. Captain Lisa Chen stepped off the shuttle onto the Velthari flagship. The effect was immediate. The aliens pressed themselves against the walls, their large eyes fixed on her with a mixture of fascination and horror. She was everything they were not: compact, muscular, and radiating an aura of controlled aggression that made their instincts scream danger. Her stride across their pristine deck was confident and purposeful, each step making sounds that seemed too heavy for her size. When she smiled in greeting, revealing teeth that were clearly designed for tearing meat. Several of the younger Velthari actually fainted and had to be carried away by medical staff. "Thank you for responding to our call," Prime Minister Kelris managed, though his voice quavered. "We are grateful for any assistance you can provide." Lisa nodded and casually leaned against a support beam while they talked. The metal groaned and bent under her grip, shaped by hands that had been strengthened by a lifetime of fighting against crushing gravity in hostile environments. The sound made every alien in the room flinch. "We received your distress signal," she said through the translation device, her tone friendly, but her eyes scanning the room with the alertness of a predator. "Tell us about these Mergoth. What kind of force are we dealing with?" The briefing that followed was like watching 2 different species look at the same picture and see completely different things. The Velthari spoke of the Murgoth with terror and despair, describing them as an unstoppable force of nature that consumed everything in its path. They have ships the size of cities, trembled Defense Coordinator Velkar, weapons that can crack planets. They've destroyed 17 of our worlds in just 4 months. Nothing we do even slows them down. But as the holographic displays showed, the Murgoth fleet movements and battle tactics. The humans in the room began to exchange glances that the aliens couldn't interpret. It wasn't fear or despair. It was something that looked almost like boredom. Sergeant Dave Wilson, who had been quietly studying the tactical readouts, finally spoke up. They're just bullies. Big, dumb bullies who've never faced real opposition. The Velthari stared at him in shock. This creature, who barely came up to their shoulders, was dismissing their destroyers as mere bullies. Admiral Harrison had joined the briefing by hologram, his weathered face studying the enemy formations with what could only be described as predatory interest. We've seen this before. Earth history is full of empires that thought terror made them invincible. Mongols, the Nazis, dozens of others. They all had the same weakness. What weakness? Asked Thalara, desperate for any hope. They don't know how to fight someone who fights back, Captain Shen answered, her smile now looking less friendly and more like a wolf showing its teeth. They've built their entire strategy around terrorizing peaceful species. But we're not peaceful. The human officers began discussing strategy in terms that made the Veltharia's blood run cold. They talked about acceptable casualty rates, about using their own ships as weapons, about tactics that prioritize victory over survival. These weren't just warriors, they were something far more frightening as the meeting continued. Prime Minister Kel Reese found himself wondering if they had made a terrible mistake, had called across the stars for salvation, and instead, they had summoned creatures who might be worse than their enemies. The humans spoke casually about violence that would horrify the Murgoth themselves. But then he remembered the burning worlds, the billions of his people who were already dead, and the certain extinction that awaited them all if nothing changed. Perhaps sometimes he thought the only cure for monsters was to call upon even greater monsters. The humans were already making plans to hunt the hunters. And despite his fear, Kelrus felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. The galaxy was about to learn why Earth was classified as a death world, and why that classification existed for very good reasons. Admiral Harrison stood on the bridge of his flagship, studying the tactical display with the patience of a hunter. The Murgoth fleet was approaching the Kepler system, home to 2 billion Velthari civilians who had nowhere to run. Standard military doctrine would suggest meeting the enemy at maximum range with overwhelming force. Harrison had other ideas. Captain Rodriguez, take your patrol group and position yourselves at the edge of the asteroid field. Make yourselves visible, but vulnerable. I want them to think they've found easy prey. Rodriguez grinned from his command chair aboard the destroyer Phoenix. He understood the plan immediately. Bait and switch, sir. My favorite kind of fishing. The human patrol consisted of just 5 ships against a Murgoth invasion force of 30 massive warships. To any reasonable observer, it looked like suicide. But Harrison had spent decades studying military history, from ancient Earth battles to modern space engagements. He knew that overconfidence was often a commander's greatest weakness. General Morkath, aboard the Murgoth flagship Blood Drinker, saw the small human force and laughed with genuine amusement. His species had evolved from pack hunters on a savage world, but they had grown soft through centuries of easy victories against peaceful races. 5 ships, he growled to his bridge crew, his massive clawed hands gesturing at the display. These Deathworlders send 5 ships against my entire fleet. Either they are insane, or they think so little of us that this is meant as an insult. His tactical officer, a scarred veteran named Grickstar, studied the readings more carefully. General, their positioning is strange. They're in the perfect spot for us to surround them, but also perfectly positioned to retreat into the asteroid field. It could be a trap. Morkath's eyes blazed with anger. A trap. From creatures who have existed in space for less than a decade? We have conquered 1,000 worlds while they were still discovering fire. Attack immediately. Surround them. I want to see how these famous Deathworlders die. The Murgoth fleet moved forward in their traditional formation, a crushing wall, a firepower designed to inspire terror in their enemies. They had used this same approach on 17 Velthari worlds, and it had never failed. Captain Rodriguez watched them approach on his view screen, his crew tense at their stations. The enemy ships were massive, each one 3 times the size of his destroyer. Their weapons could reduce his entire patrol to atoms in minutes. "Sir, they're taking the bait," reported his tactical officer. "Full encirclement in progress." "Perfect," Rodriguez replied, his voice calm despite the certain death approaching them. "All ships, prepare for emergency acceleration on my mark. And remember, no heroics until the Admiral gives the signal." The Murgoth attack began with overwhelming force. Energy beams and missile salvos filled space around the human patrol, lighting up their shields in brilliant displays of destruction. The human ships twisted and weaved through the barrage, their pilots pushing their vessels to limits that would have torn apart most alien craft, but they were still vastly outnumbered. One by one, their shields began to fail. Rodriguez opened a channel to the entire Murgoth fleet as his ship shook under enemy fire. "Now you've done it," he said, and something in his voice made every alien on the enemy bridge stop and listen. "You just made us angry." That was the signal Admiral Harrison had been waiting for. The ambush exploded from 3 dimensions at once. Human warships materialized from hyperspace at angles that should have been impossible, their crews enduring acceleration forces that would have killed most species instantly. They came from above, below, and through the asteroid field itself, catching the Murgoth in a perfect crossfire. But what happened next shocked even the battle-hardened Murgoth. Instead of maintaining safe distances and trading fire like civilized warriors, the human ships began ramming attacks. The first collision saw the cruiser New York slam directly into the side of a Murgoth battleship, its crew evacuating in escape pods at the last possible second. The enemy vessel cracked in half, spilling atmosphere and bodies into space. "Impossible," snarled General Morcath, watching his ships die around him. "These creatures fight like they don't fear death itself." Colonel Jack Thompson's voice came through the communication channels, ice-cold and deadly serious. "That's because we don't fear death, General. We fear something much worse, letting innocent people die while we could have saved them." Another human ship, the destroyer Atlanta, used its engines to accelerate directly into a Murgoth cruiser. The impact was so violent, it created a brief star as both vessels' reactors went critical. But in those final seconds, the human crew had transmitted the location of 3 more enemy ships to their fleet. The Murgoth had never faced an enemy like this. Their entire military doctrine was based on intimidation and overwhelming force against opponents who valued their own lives. But these humans seemed to consider their ships, and even their lives, as just another weapon to be used. Panic began to spread through the alien fleet. Ships that had never retreated from battle started breaking formation. Commanders who had conquered worlds began broadcasting surrender requests. The battle raged for 6 brutal hours. When the guns finally fell silent, half the Murgoth invasion force was destroyed or disabled. Survivors fled in terror, carrying stories that would spread throughout their empire like wildfire. The humans had lost only 3 ships, but those losses had been deliberate sacrifices that saved millions of lives aboard Admiral Harrison's flagship. The Velthari delegation sat in stunned silence as they watched the battle recordings. Prime Minister Kel Reese stared at footage of human crews calmly evacuating their ships, seconds before ramming enemy vessels. "They used their own ships as weapons," whispered Science Minister Thalara, her 4 eyes wide with a mixture of admiration and horror. "They sacrificed themselves without hesitation." Admiral Harrison noticed their expressions and tried to offer some context. "We learned long ago that sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to hit back harder than they hit you. The Murgoth respect only strength." But even as he spoke, Kelris wondered what kind of species could fight with such calculated savagery. They had been saved, yes, but by creatures who made war with a cold efficiency that was somehow more terrifying than the Murgotha's brutal simplicity. The galaxy was about to learn a hard lesson about the children of Earth. War Chief Grillmoth paced the bridge of his flagship like a caged predator, his massive claws clicking against the metal deck plating. For the first time in his 40-year military career, he had encountered an enemy that genuinely puzzled him. The tactical displays showed the aftermath of 3 separate engagements with these humans, and each battle had defied everything he thought he knew about warfare. His species, the Morgoth, had evolved from apex predators on a world where only the strongest survived. They understood violence, respected strength, and had built their empire on the simple principle that fear was the ultimate weapon. But these humans fought differently. "Explain it to me again," he growled to his intelligence officer, a scarred veteran named Vexar, who had analyzed countless enemy species over the decades. Vexar pulled up the holographic recordings. Own expression troubled. "They don't fight for territory, glory, or resources like normal species. Watch this engagement at the Theta Centauri system." The display showed a human patrol fleet facing overwhelming odds to protect a Veltheri refugee convoy. Any rational commander would have retreated, preserving their forces for a more strategic battle. Instead, the humans had thrown themselves into a hopeless fight, buying time for civilian transports to escape. "They lost half their ships," Grillmoth observed. "Yes, but they saved 3 million non-combatants who weren't even their own species," Vexar replied. "And look at this communication we intercepted from their commander." A human voice filled the bridge, calm and determined even as his ship took heavy fire. "All units maintain formation. Those transport ships have children aboard. We don't retreat when kids are in danger." Grillmoth's eyes narrowed. In Morgoth, culture, protecting one's own offspring, was natural. But extending that protection to alien children was incomprehensible. It suggested a level of moral commitment that went beyond mere military alliance. "There's something else," Vexar continued, pulling up combat footage. "Watch how they fight when they're losing." The recordings showed human crews in desperate situations, their ships crippled and outgunned. But instead of surrendering or fleeing, they became more dangerous, not less. They jury-rigged weapons from damaged systems, used their own ships as guided missiles, and fought with an intensity that actually increased as their chances of survival decreased. "It's like they become stronger when facing death," Grillmoth mused. "Most species break under that kind of pressure. These humans, they seem to thrive on it." The war chief had built his reputation on understanding his enemies, finding their weaknesses, and exploiting their fears. But humans appeared to have no exploitable fears. They feared failure more than death, disgrace more than pain, and the suffering of innocence more than their own destruction. "I must face one of them myself," Grillmoth declared his decision. Crystallizing as he spoke, challenged their greatest warrior to single combat. "Only by fighting them personally can I understand what drives these creatures." His bridge crew exchanged worried glances. Morgoth, dueling traditions were sacred, but they had never been used against opponents from a death world. The risk was enormous. War Chief, his tactical advisor, ventured carefully. "Perhaps we should study them further before." "No." Grillmoth cut him off with a slash of his clawed hand. "I have studied enough recordings and tactical reports. I need to feel their strength myself, see their courage up close. Transmit the challenge on all frequencies." The response came within hours, and it was not what anyone expected. Instead of their greatest champion, or most experienced commander, the humans sent a simple Marine sergeant named Ben Davis. The dueling ground was prepared on a barren asteroid between the two fleets, the representatives from both sides watching. Via holographic projection, the arena itself was basic, just a flat section of rock with energy barriers to contain the combat. Grillmoth studied his opponent as they entered the arena together. Ben Davis was unremarkable by human standards. Average height, stocky build, with a kind of weathered face that suggested years of hard fighting. He carried no advanced weapons, just a crude metal bar he had fashioned from scrap materials. The size difference was staggering. Grillmoth stood 9 feet tall, his natural armor plating gleaming under the artificial lights. His claws were each, as long as a human finger, sharp enough to slice through steel, His species had been bred by evolution to kill efficiently. "This is going to hurt," Ben muttered to himself, as he hefted his improvised weapon, loud enough for the alien to hear. The comment caught Gromoth off guard. Most opponents facing him showed fear, anger, or desperate bravado. This human sounded like he was commenting on the weather. "You seem calm for someone about to die," Gromoth observed, genuinely curious. Ben shrugged, settling into a combat stance that looked deceptively casual. "Dying's part of the job, Chief. The trick is making sure it counts for something." Fight began with Gromoth's traditional charge, a devastating rush meant to overwhelm opponents through sheer physical dominance. His claws raked across Ben's improvised armor, drawing blood and sending the human stumbling backward. For the first 10 minutes, it looked like a massacre. Mouth-S, superior reach, natural weapons, and armored hide gave him every advantage. Ben took hit after hit, his makeshift protection failing under the alien's assault. But something strange began to happen. Despite his injuries, Ben didn't slow down. If anything, he seemed to adapt to the punishment. Learning Gromoth's attack patterns and finding ways to counter them, the turning point came when Ben did something no Morgoth warrior would ever consider. He deliberately took a claw strike to his shoulder in order to get inside Grailmouth's guard. The pain was excruciating, but it gave him the opening he needed. What followed was a masterclass in human tenacity. Ben used his superior endurance, tactical thinking, and sheer stubborn refusal to quit. He turned the arena itself into a weapon, using the uneven terrain and low gravity to his advantage. The end came suddenly. Gromoth, exhausted from his own aggressive attacks, left himself open for just a moment. Ben's metal bar connected with a weak point in the alien's natural armor. The war chief went down hard. As Gromoth lay on the rocky ground, struggling to breathe, Ben knelt beside him. There was no mockery in the human's eyes, no celebration of victory. Instead, there was something the alien had never seen from an enemy: respect. "You fought with honor," Ben said, his voice carrying clearly across the arena and into the communication systems of both fleets. "But you chose to prey on the innocent. That's where we differ." Those words, broadcast to thousands of alien warriors on both sides, carried more weight than any weapon. Humans weren't just superior fighters, they were something far more dangerous. They possessed an unshakable moral code that made them willing to die for strangers. As medical teams rushed to treat both fighters, Gromoth found himself facing a question that had never occurred to him before. What happened when an unstoppable force met an unmovable moral conviction? The answer was beginning to terrify him. Across the Morgoth fleet, commanders who had never retreated from battle began issuing orders to withdraw. They had come to conquer a peaceful species and instead found themselves facing something they didn't understand, couldn't defeat. But their curiosity about these humans had been awakened, and that curiosity would soon spread throughout their empire. The galaxy was about to discover that Earth's children fought not just with superior tactics or technology, but with something far more powerful: an absolute commitment to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The final battle was set to take place at the edge of Velthari space, in a system called Haven's Gate. It was a fitting name for what would become the most decisive engagement in galactic history. The Morgoth had gathered their entire remaining armada, over 200 massive warships, each one a fortress of destruction that had leveled worlds. Admiral Harrison stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Earth vessel Defiant, studying the tactical displays with grim satisfaction. Every human ship in the galaxy had answered the call. Mining vessels, cargo haulers, even luxury liners had been hastily converted into warships. The entire human fleet numbered barely half the enemy force. But Harrison had learned something about his species during these months of war. Humans didn't win by being stronger. They won by being willing to pay prices that others couldn't imagine. "All fleet commanders, this is Admiral Harrison," he broadcast across the communication network. "Today we implement Operation Ragnarok. Every captain understands their role. Every crew has volunteered. What we do here will echo through history." On the bridge of the Velthari observation ship, Prime Minister Kel Reese watched the human fleet arrange itself in patterns that made no sense to conventional military thinking. Their ships were spreading out in loose formations, positioning themselves not for maximum firepower, but for maximum impact velocity. "What are they doing?" asked Science Minister Thalara, her 4 eyes studying the tactical displays with growing confusion. "This formation leaves them completely vulnerable." The answer came as the Murgoth fleet opened fire. Instead of returning, fire at long range like any sane commander would do, the human ships began accelerating directly toward their enemies. Their engines burned at maximum power, pushing the vessels far beyond normal safety limits. "All ships, prepare for kinetic bombardment protocol." Admiral Harrison's voice echoed across every human vessel. Captain Amy Foster commanded the destroyer, Portland, one of the smaller ships in the human fleet. Her crew had been with her for 3 years, through battles across a dozen star systems. They were good people, engineers who had families back on Earth. Young officers fresh from the academy, veterans who had seen too much war already. "Captain." Her first officer called out as Murgoth's weapons fire began hammering their shields. "We're taking heavy damage. Shield generators are failing." Amy looked around her bridge at faces she had come to love like family. "All hands, this is the captain. You know the drill. Everyone to the escape pods. We've got 60 seconds before impact." The evacuation of a starship in the middle of battle was something no military had ever attempted before humans. But they had practiced it, trained for it, and now they executed it with the precision that only came from absolute commitment. As her crew rushed to the escape pods, Amy remained at her post, making final course corrections to ensure her ship would strike the enemy flagship at exactly the right angle. Through her view screen, she could see the massive Murgoth dreadnought growing larger, its weapons still firing at her crippled vessel. "This is Captain Foster of the Portland." She transmitted on all frequencies as her crew's escape pods ejected safely behind her. "Tell our story. Make sure they know we chose this." The Portland struck the Murgoth flagship at nearly a quarter of light speed. The impact was visible from 3 star systems away, a brief new star that outshone the local sun for several minutes. When the light faded, both ships were gone, along with the 8,000 Murgoth crew members aboard the enemy vessel. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out as human ship after human ship made their final runs. The destroyer Seattle rammed straight through a Murgoth battlecruiser, breaking it in half. The cargo hauler New Detroit, loaded with explosive materials, detonated in the middle of an enemy formation, taking out 6 ships at once. War Chief Growlmouth watched from his command ship as his mighty armada was systematically destroyed by an enemy that treated their own vessels as ammunition. "This is impossible," he snarled at his tactical officer. "No species fights like this. No commander asks for such sacrifices." But even as he spoke, he could see human escape pods scattered throughout the battle zone. Their crews evacuated safely before each kamikaze run. These weren't suicide attacks driven by desperation or fanaticism. They were calculated tactical decisions made by people who had weighed the cost and decided that some things were worth dying for. The battle raged for 18 brutal hours. Human ships continued their impossible attacks while Murgoth vessels, built for intimidating weaker species, found themselves outmatched by an enemy that simply refused to be intimidated. When the guns finally fell silent, the Murgoth Empire was broken. Of their mighty armada, fewer than 30 ships remained, limping away into hyperspace, carrying word of their defeat. The survivors would spread the story throughout their empire, how the humans had won by turning their own bodies and ships into weapons. But victory had come at a terrible cost. The human fleet was decimated. Dozens of ships were gone, their crews either dead or drifting in escape pods waiting for rescue. Thousands of Earth's finest had paid the ultimate price for the freedom of a species they had never met before. Admiral Harrison stood in the wreckage of his own bridge, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead, and watched the rescue operations begin. Human and Velthari vessels worked together to collect the escape pods, saving everyone they could. Prime Minister Kelrus transported aboard the Defiant to personally thank the human commander. What he found was a tired old man who looked like he had aged decades in the past few hours. "Are we safe now?" asked Science Minister Thalara, her voice small and uncertain. Harrison's weathered face was grim as he considered the question. "From the Murgoth, Yes, they won't be bothering anyone for a very long time. From us, he paused, meeting her eyes directly. That depends entirely on you. The words sent a chill through the Velthari delegation. They had been saved, but by creatures whose capacity for violence exceeded anything they had imagined possible. The humans had announced themselves to the galaxy, not through diplomacy or trade, but through a display of controlled savagery that would be remembered for centuries. As the human fleet prepared to depart, badly damaged ships limping toward home, the galaxy began to react. Diplomatic envoys from dozens of species were already preparing to make the journey to Earth. Some came seeking alliance with these powerful new players. Others came to assess whether humanity represented salvation or the next great threat to galactic peace. The Velthari were free, their world safe, their children able to grow up without fear. But they had learned a hard truth that would haunt them forever. Sometimes the cure really is more frightening than the disease. And somewhere in the depths of space, human engineers were already designing new ships. Human tacticians were studying new battle plans. Human diplomats were preparing to negotiate humanity's place in a galaxy that would never be the same. The children of Earth had announced themselves, and the universe would never forget.